Hello again, guys. It is I, Free 700. We are back with some Warhammer Fantasy lore. This time, the Skarrenawi. There's going to be a lot of ways we're going to pronounce that, so just get ready. So what the fuck are the Skarrenawi? The Skarrenawi are also known as the Hill Dwarves. Now, they're not really like a separate species of dwarves. They're just a different type of culture, a different type of people, I would say. Kind of like the difference between, I would say, Americans and British. We're still people, but we just have different types of cultures and traditions and such like that. Now, that being said, are the Hill Dwarves in any way, shape, and form that different from the regular dwarves? No, not really. They still work together. They still will always fight and defend each other. The only issue is that they do view things a little differently. And by little, I mean, to them it feels like a lot, but to us humans, it looks really tiny and minuscule. So first off, let's start with the name, Skarrenawi. Now, Skarrenawi is just a dwarf word for hill dwarf, but it's not a word that they would openly call another dwarf. It's not a word that you would use to describe another dwarf. By rough translation, what it means is dwarves under the sky. So that naturally translates in Reichsspiel to hill dwarf. Now, that being said, it is more of an insult because of the fact that the people who usually live under the sky are the elves, the Elgi. So when you call a dwarf a Skarrenawi, he could take offense to it, thinking that you're more or less calling him an elf dwarf, which is, of course, an insult to them, as the two cultures are totally different, totally polar. Like, dwarves are very stubborn, tough, enduring. High elves are very arrogant, think they know it all, and they're very fragile. So, of course, a dwarf is going to take high offense to this if you ever call him that. That being said, though, the dwarves definitely do discriminate. The dwarfs of the earth do discriminate against the dwarves of the hills. Now, one of the interesting things about their society, more or less, now that we're going to get down into it, the Skarrenawi do have some interesting societal developments. That being said, that they live in towns. These are known as kazads. And kazad means fortress, because that's essentially what they are. They do build walls around their cities. That helps them, one, protect themselves, but two, they feel better inside. Also, once you're inside, pretty much everything is going to be stone. So it's not really that different from a Karak. A Karak would be inside a mountain, very stony. The only difference really would be that inside a Kazad, you would see paved roads. That's something that dwarves aren't used to. Then you would also see, if you're really rich and really just arrogant, you would actually pave the road with gold. This was seen a lot in the War of Vengeance, where one dwarf king was so arrogant he would just pave the inner holdings of his castle gold. So that way when you were walking, the ground was a little softer and also really shiny. This, of course, is a little bit extreme, but this is what the dwarves would do. Their houses would be made of a mixture of wood and stone. It was a really interesting development. That being said, one of the more interesting societal developments is that dwarf Karaks, when you're inside the dwarven Karak, just about every dwarf you encounter is usually a miner or a smith. In a Khazad, you will not really see that so much. Instead, what you're going to see is a lot of traders, a lot of merchants, maybe a few rangers or two. So that being said, after the War of Vengeance, since hill dwarves are not really much of a thing anymore, technically rangers are still hill dwarves because they usually prefer being outside the Karaks. In fact, you could argue that imperial dwarfs are still Skarrenawi. So there is some of that interesting development that later on you could still make the argument that Skarrenawi exists, they're just a different shape and form. Now, what kind of started this whole development? What caused the dwarves to leave the mountains and set up these kazads to kind of develop new towns? Well, the big issue is that simply put, there's more land out there than just mountains. So the dwarves figured the more entrepreneurial types and the ones who don't care so much about the traditions and don't hold so much reverence for the mountain and the ancestral power it holds, they said, hey, let's try expanding. Let's go out there and set up these new fortresses out and about and get new resources even. Like, instead of us sitting there and, having to assemble a throng just so you can go out and chop some trees, why not just move where the trees are? Why not just go where the river is? Why not set up in new places where resources are much easier to obtain? This is more or less the argument you can make. But the issue is, of course, is that dwarves are very staunch on their tradition. We see that they hold very high reverence for the mountains. They hold very high reverence for the ground. To live above the ground is just viewed as alien, weird. Also, it's different. It's kind of deafening to their senses. Now, you may think that's a little bit of a weird statement. How's it deafening to their senses? They can still hear, they can still see. Well, the thing is with dwarves is that they're actually able to touch the stone in the rocks, and they can feel almost the presence of the people who've touched the rock before. They can feel vibrations in the dirt much, much more keenly than any other race. So to be away from that and to instead be amongst the trees and the birds, this is almost deafening to them. This is just odd. They feel out of their element. So, of course, a lot of dwarves would say, hell no, I'm not doing that. But one of the more interesting things, too, about the Khazads and the Skarrenawi was that they were more open to trade with outsiders. This would be the elf, the Elgi. This, of course, was most unsettling for many of the dwarves. See, the other dwarves in the holds were so upset by how many elves there were in their lands that they were trying to petition the High King to just remove them and get their asses the fuck away from their hold. To the Skarrenawi, though, this is their lifeblood, is trade. So when these outsiders come in with goods, they're more than happy to trade. In fact, these trades would allow it for these Khazads to actually set up their own kings and almost declare their own independence if they wanted to. That's how much gold was being sent into their coffers. That being said, a lot of Skarrenawi viewed the dwarves inside the mountains as stubborn, too traditional, but also jealous and envious of the power that the hill dwarves had, since they could get so much money from just trading. That being said, though, dwarves are still dwarves. These hill dwarves weren't that open-minded to just let elves run around their city. They actually set up, I would kind of call them like little bazaars, open markets outside the city walls. So if you ever wanted to trade, and the king or ruler of the Khazad was a little more traditionalist than other hill dwarfs, he'll set the open market miles away from the town to basically where he doesn't see it. Other dwarves who are a little bit more open-minded could set it up right outside the gate. But bottom line is that you're never going to go in. They were still isolationists up to that point where they're just like, whoa, outsiders. We love to do business with you. We'll love to fight by side with you. But we are not willing to let you walk up and down our streets. No, 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 no. So that being said, the Skarrenawi actually had a lot of stuff at their disposal that was just elven in nature. Like velvets, silks, a lot of weird, interesting arts and crafts. This was most unusual for the dwarves, suffice to say. Again, this just kind of further put a chisel between the Skarrenawi and the regular dwarves. Because regular dwarves were like, pah, this is weak. Because, see, dwarves prefer fur and leather. It's tougher. So when they make these fine contraptions, it's usually out of that. Because, again, it's tougher. But when they see this soft, almost falls through your fingers, silk and velvet, they're just like, pah, this is trash. This is useless. So I think the Skarrenawi are very interesting. The closest we could get to this as of current Warhammer Fantasy would be probably the Imperial Dwarves. They have their own little towns inside Imperial cities where they have their own walls. Again, they're all about trading, and they're much, much more open-minded about tradition. Now, as far as physiological differences, I said that they weren't really different species, but they do have some differences due to the living conditions that they're in. Now, a regular dwarf would be slightly hunched and a little bit broader shouldered because, well, he's working hard in the mines. His daily life is going to be hard work. No matter what position he is in the clan, it's going to be usually hard work, unless he's a ranger. Now, the hill dwarves, on the other hand, were actually a little bit taller, a little slender, because that's just the way it is. They had more room to kind of grow instead of being hunched into those tunnels, into those narrow hallways, the short roofs. No, they had the sky, so sky's the limit. They could stand up taller, less broad-shouldered, because again, they didn't need that much muscle mass since they were mining. They still made excellent soldiers and stuff, but they were just a lot slender. Then there was also the main difference too in skin color. So we're not talking about skin color like black versus white or Asian versus Hispanic. No, we're talking more like just simply tanner. So a dwarf from the hold would be really pale in comparison to a dwarf of the hills, as they would be a little bit more sun-kissed, so a little tanner, not too bad. And their hair might be a little bit more sun-splotched, but that's about it. There are really no big differences that would separate these dwarves like the Chaos Dwarves. The Chaos Dwarves were hugely different compared to regular dwarves. Tusk, really nasty, gnarly teeth, like, yeah. No, these dwarves are very different. But when it came to the hill dwarves, as far as their warriors go, their warriors are a little bit more interesting in my opinion, because one of the warriors that we see, he doesn't wear super heavy armor like a normal dwarf would. So this would be in the War of Vengeance. This dwarf decides to more or less challenge a prince to see who could slaughter the most orcs. And this dwarf is known as the best fighter in all of the hill dwarves military. And he's got a legend to him and everything. What does he wear to a battle? Leather. Just really, really tough leather. And he doesn't bring a shield. Instead, he just brings his axe, his one-handed axe. And the way he fights is very fluid, very improvised, but it's very different from the other dwarves. The other dwarves would be more staunch, hold your ground, push them back, be like the mountain, be like the stone. But when it comes to the dwarves who are Skarrenawi, they're more into fight quick, fight hard, try to get into the enemy and cut them down using your more better strength. But besides that, that's really the difference between the Skarrenawi and the regular dwarves. Besides that, I hope you guys enjoyed. Maybe you guys learned a thing or two. I hope you guys can comment down below and tell me what you guys think. Maybe you guys would prefer to have Skarrenawi than you would Imperial Dwarves. Maybe you guys think Imperial Dwarves are way better. But I would love to hear your opinions on this. Besides that, see you guys next time.